Okay, time for one of my rare forays into the world of modern gaming. There was no way in hell I was going to let this game go by without saying something about it. But I do have to stress this is not a review. I'm not attempting to provide an objective perspective weighing the merits of the game for a general audience. No, there's no chance I could be subjective here. Hell, I'd give this game a 10 out of 10 for the music alone, even if there was zero gameplay. The thing is, as you'll know if you've watched many of my videos, I'm a huge fan of Final Fantasy. And I'm a particular fan of the music of the Final Fantasy series. Except that's not really saying enough. In fact, it may be impossible to say enough to convey just how much I love Final Fantasy music. The words just don't exist. And if they did, I'd hesitate to use them, because if I could actually communicate how much I love it, people would probably start thinking I was insane, or at least emotionally unbalanced. And they might not be wrong. As it happens, I also love rhythm games. I've done a few videos on my favourite games from the genre, including Frequency and Amplitude, the somewhat obscure PlayStation 2 titles that really got me into the genre. For the last 2 decades, those games have remained my favourite rhythm games, but at last, here comes Theatrhythm Final Bar Line, which may just top them. Not that this is the first Theatrhythm game. As the name suggests, it's actually the culmination of a series that has seen several entries and has one hell of a back catalogue of music ready to go. But it is the first in the series to come to a console. The first 2 games are on the 3DS, and I played them quite a bit, but as someone who spends 90% of their lives sitting in front of a monitor, the key selling point of a handheld system, its portability, is kind of lost on me. In all honesty, the majority of my playtime with the 3DS games occurred during power outages, when my PC and consoles were of no use to me. I also wasn't a huge fan of the stylus-based controls of the 3DS games. They worked well enough, but I just didn't feel quite the same connection to the music as I did with Amplitude. And I just cannot fully appreciate any game that's played on a small handheld screen. I'm a doddering old man, my vision is failing. I like to look at things on a big screen, preferably a few inches from my poor decrepit eyes. There was also an arcade game that, as far as I can tell, was limited to Japan and maybe a few other locations via import. I've seen videos of it and it looks fun with its custom controllers, but obviously I never had a chance to play it. This game, Final Bar Line, is actually based on this arcade version, which makes sense given that the stylus-based touch controls of the 3DS games wouldn't really work on a PlayStation. So what is it when you come right down to it? Well, it's a game where you tap buttons and tilt the controller sticks in time to music from the Final Fantasy games. Pretty much every gamer on the planet will be able to get a good idea of whether they're going to like this game based entirely on that one sentence description. Some people will hate it, some people will love it, quite a few will be indifferent. I think I've made it pretty clear where I am on that spectrum. But even from the depths of my utterly biased love of this game, I really do think that Final Bar Line is an objectively top quality product that will appeal to more people than might seem apparent at first. The controls are nigh on perfect, simple in their design, elegant in their simplicity. Tap a button, any button, when a red icon approaches one of the circles on the right side of the screen, hold the button for green icons, and let go when the green line stops. Flick a stick in the direction of the arrow for yellow icons. Actually, I realised while recording this that I actually switched to a different colour scheme at some point, so those colours may not be accurate in the video you're watching. Anyway, that's the fundamentals, although there are a few variations. There are 3 types of stages in the game. Battle music sequences, which make up roughly 2/3 of the tracks in the game, feature mostly battle and boss music and stick to the gameplay mechanics I've already mentioned. Field music sequences feature mostly environmental or travelling tracks. If you love the Chocobo and airship themes, this is where you'll find them. And they include one additional mechanic where you have to tilt a stick to match the wavy line on the screen. This is something that possibly made more sense for a handheld game using a stylus, and honestly I was kind of worried how it would work in this game, but it's pretty much fine. It helps that you really don't need any great precision. As long as you're tilting the stick in basically the right direction, you'll be fine. The final type of stages are event music sequences. There aren't as many of these, only one for most of the games represented in Final Bar Line, and they're functionally identical to the battle music sequences, except the notes scroll vertically, and there's a kick-ass CG sequence playing in the background. Well, okay, the early games just have gameplay footage rather than epic animated sequences, but if you're an old school FF fan, that's probably just as good. There's also a multiplayer mode, which ends up being a nifty distraction rather than a burgeoning new esport. You can play against up to 3 other people, but there isn't exactly much in the way of interaction or cunning stratagems. All you can really do is press those buttons to the best of your abilities and keep track of where your score places you amongst your rivals. There are also these things called bursts, which as far as I can tell just means that random hindrances will affect random players at random times. These bursts include stuff like partially covering up your screen with fat chocobos, or adding extra fake notes to distract you, or making the timing more strict, meaning you're more likely to miss notes and less likely to get criticals, which are key to big scores. These bursts can be turned off, and from what little I've seen, that tends to be what people do. They add a fair bit of chaos to proceedings, but they're clearly not intended to be balanced or fair, so it makes sense that a lot of people won't want them interfering with the competition. I actually saw a developer of the game tweeting about how surprised he was that every multiplayer match he tried had bursts disabled. I guess he underestimated how seriously gamers can take the simple act of pressing buttons in time to music. Speaking of the music, there is a lot of it. There are 385 tracks in the base game, with another 27 in the deluxe edition, and DLC planned to bring the total over 500. By any standards, that's a hell of a lot of music. But this isn't a case of quantity over quality. There is just so much high quality music here. And yes, I'm probably biased, take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I'm far from the only one who esteems Final Fantasy music so highly. It's acclaimed for a reason. But even if you've never heard a track from the series that you liked, even if game music tends to leave you cold, I can almost guarantee there will be a couple of dozen tracks in here that you'll really be able to appreciate. Because there's just so damn much variety. From the simple but evocative chiptunes of the early days, through to early synthesized attempts at orchestral music on the SNES, through to actual orchestral music once CD quality sound became a thing, and then onto every genre conceivable, there's something here for everyone. Final Fantasy's composers haven't just embraced variety, they've revelled in it. I mean, reworking the Chocobo theme into a new and unexpected genre with every Final Fantasy game is a trend that stretches back decades. So yeah, I love 90% of the music in this game and I like the other 10%, and while those percentages may not be the same for everyone, even a tone-deaf waxwork of Margaret Thatcher with its ears cut off would find something it could groove to. So that's the meat of the game, hundreds and hundreds of fantastic songs, coupled with really solid and enjoyable rhythm game mechanics. If it was just that, it honestly would be a 10 out of 10 game for me. But then there's all the RPG stuff. And I'll just say it, it's fine. It doesn't ultimately add much to the game, but it doesn't detract from it either. The RPG elements are simple and ignorable. Basically, you can select a team of 4 from a huge array of Final Fantasy characters. They each have different stats and different roles like mage, healer, summoner, physical damage, that sort of thing. So when you're doing a battle music sequence, it's not just called that because it typically uses battle music, it actually is a battle. You do damage with each note successfully hit, and more damage with a well-timed critical hit. Spells go off based on predetermined criteria, for instance a mage may cast a fireball for every 30 notes successfully hit. If you miss a note you take damage, and if you get hit often enough, i.e. miss enough notes, you'll fail the stage. If you win though, you get experience for each enemy killed, plus the chance to acquire items. There really isn't much more to it than that. You'll only have to think of it more deeply if you want to engage with the essentially optional quest system. To unlock songs to play freely, you just have to complete them in the series quest mode, but each track in this mode also has an optional quest, really just a simple extra objective, like killing a certain number of enemies or having a particular character in your party. Some of these quests are really tough, especially the ones that require you to kill a boss in a certain amount of time, in my experience, and to get them done, you'll need to level up a well-balanced party and equip them with the right abilities. But again, this is totally ignorable. The items you get for completing quests are invariably just things that will help you level up more to do more quests. It's not as if you have to do them to unlock songs. Personally, it is something I've engaged with, but not to any great degree. I still have many quests left undone, and I don't really care. But as someone with borderline OCD, I do still find it nifty to complete a song and see that Cloud from Final Fantasy VII has gone up to level 99. I mean, almost all my enjoyment comes from just playing the game, but hey, I'm a JRPG fan. Hitting level 99 will always be meaningful. The only way that these RPG mechanics might affect someone who otherwise would not care about them at all comes from the fact that the more health your party has, and the more healing spells they have access to, the easier it becomes to actually complete songs. None of the RPG elements will ever affect your score, that's always down to pure skill. but simply getting through the tougher tracks without dying is made much easier by having a high level party of healers. Maybe this sounds like it could be a big deal, but it's really not. For one thing, if you're needing to rely on healers to actually complete a song, it's too tough for you anyway and you're probably not having fun. This is definitely true for me. I can only get through the tougher songs in the game with at least 3 level 99 healers, and mostly I'm just button mashing my way through the frenetic sections, which isn't exactly satisfying. Yes, I've completed those songs, but I sure wouldn't say I've beaten them. That satisfaction will only come when, or if, my skills improve. For another thing, it's really very easy to level up 4 healers if you decide to go down that route, and you'll be learning and getting better as you do so, and presumably having fun. Having just mentioned how difficult the game can get, I think it's worth saying that Final Bar Line does an absolutely fantastic job of catering to every skill level. Every song has an easy, medium and hard version, and many songs have an extra hard version as well. But even within those categories there's a lot of variation, and the game actually assigns each version of each track a numerical score from 1 to 15, which I think is a better way of considering the difficulty. Tracks with a rating of 1 should be doable by even the noobiest of rhythm game noobs. Tracks with a rating of 15, on the other hand, should be challenging to even the proest of rhythm game pros. And getting a full clear, i.e. hitting absolutely every note, on a 15 rated track should be nigh on impossible. I'm not going to say actually impossible. I've seen the sorts of unimaginably insane feats pulled off by rhythm game gods, but for me, yeah, definitely not going to happen. In fact, there are still 1 or 2 tracks I can't complete at all, even with all the healers. Actually, I can't even come close to completing them. I mean, check this out. Even the most grizzled rhythm game veteran would find this rather difficult. I'm yet to see a video of anyone getting a full clear on this track, but I'm sure someone will do it soon enough if they haven't already. And now may be a good time to bring up the sound design, by which I mean the actual sound effects, not the music, which I've most definitely already brought up. Each note you hit correctly produces a sound, and it may not be immediately apparent how important this is to the game. I initially thought it might all get a bit distracting, that it would detract from the music, but in fact it can actually contribute to the music. At its best, it sounds like an added drum track, one that you yourself are playing. Here's what it can sound like at its most frenetic, with the actual music muted. And honestly, in some tracks these sound effects do add a new and welcome dimension to the music. Of course, you're not necessarily going to want that all the time. After all, this is some of the most beautiful music ever created, in my opinion at least, so fortunately there's always the option to adjust the sound effects independently of the music itself. Personally, I tend to mostly have it at a lower volume so it sits in the background. The developers have seen fit to add quite a few options that you may or may not find useful, but either way I appreciate the effort they've made. You can increase the speed at which notes travel across the screen, something common to a lot of rhythm games, and actually something I was kind of baffled by when I first came across it. I couldn't figure out why you'd want to make them go faster. It seemed like that would just add to the difficulty, but I soon learned that it can make it quite a bit easier to perceive the rhythm, particularly in sections where the notes come thick and fast. There are also a couple of different modes to go along with the standard gameplay. Simple mode does what it suggests. It simplifies everything by removing the need to flick the stick at any point, and also the need to press or hold multiple buttons at the same time. This is another way that the game makes itself highly accessible, and it's worth noting that absolutely all the content in the game can be unlocked and fully enjoyed, regardless of what difficulty you choose and whether or not you opt for simple mode. Their stated aim was to make this a game for everyone, and I'd say they've done a good job of it. Finally, there's pair play, which allows a form of local multiplayer. It's essentially a co-op mode where each player is responsible for either the top or bottom section of incoming notes. You don't even need a second controller. You can actually play this mode with 2 people holding different sides of the same controller, as long as you don't mind getting a little up close and personal. An added bonus to this is that a single player can add another slice of challenge to the game by taking on pair play by themselves, which functions essentially the same as normal, except now you've got to be mindful of which side of the controller you're using for which notes. So, as you can probably tell, I love this game a lot. It brings me a simple, compelling joy to play it. But it's not perfect, no game is. My issues with the game might seem a bit petty, but after spending so much time singing the praises of Final Bar Line, I better at least mention them. Firstly, while I said before that the controls are nigh on perfect, I still have a few minor quibbles. I don't really love the necessity of flicking the sticks. To me it feels a little awkward to mix in stick flicks with fast button mashing. Now you might say that's intentional, it's all part of the challenge, and that is totally valid. But it's just not something that feels entirely optimal to me. I'd rather just hammer buttons. Of course, you might also say, what about the simple mode? And it's true, that does illuminate the side notes. But simple mode has issues of its own. It doesn't actually change the note layout, it just makes all side notes simple button presses and lets you press just one button even when the screen says you should be pressing two. You also don't need to transition between two held notes. I know this is starting to sound complicated, but the upshot is that in simple mode you'll find there are many songs where you can complete large sections simply by holding down one button for extended periods. There's no doubt this is simple, but it's not exactly fun. My only other gameplay related complaint has to do with the side notes as well, and it's the way they're represented on the screen. Maybe it's just down to my doddering old eyes, but I find that the arrows don't really stand out enough, making it a little tough to see at a glance exactly which direction they're pointing, and in the more frenetic songs, a glance is all you've got. I even switched to the alternative colour mode because that seemed to make them a little clearer to me, but I still find the clarity somewhat lacking. But in all seriousness, this really could be down to my aging eyes. It may be time to have the prescription of my glasses checked. But these really are minor irritations. They're very subjective and they don't impede my enjoyment of the game much at all. I've played countless hours of Final Bar Line now and I'm still loving every minute of it, equally because of the music and the gameplay. I do have one issue that's not quite so subjective, and that's to do with the DLC. Most of the DLC consists of non-Final Fantasy music from games also published by Square, such as Nier Automata and the Saga series, and that's okay, but the Deluxe Edition also includes a set of Final Fantasy tracks that can only be acquired by purchasing that edition, and it isn't cheap. The thing is, some of these tracks are absolute icons of Final Fantasy music, with To Zanarkand being perhaps the most notable example. It does kind of suck that you have to splash out a not inconsiderable amount of extra cash for tracks that most people would say should really have been in the game anyway. It feels a bit churlish to criticise Final Bar Line like this given how vast its music library is, but I think it's a valid criticism, even if I personally am more than willing to pay the extra price. Anyway, I think I have to conclude that, yes, this is now my favourite rhythm game of all time. I still think the fundamental gameplay of something like Amplitude works a little better, but the soundtrack of Final Bar Line and all the little extra ways the developers have showered love on the game really do set it apart. Well, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe and comment and join my Discord, links in the description, yada yada yada. Maybe buy me a coffee on Ko-fi.com if you really want to show your support, links also in the description. Until next time though, get off my lawn.